Okay. So I'm going to try to get a nice big flake right through this bigger mass area there. Now it's important to have the surface convex or bulging outward whenever you do a powerful flake. If you've got, a lot of guys make that mistake where they try to flake into a dip. You're not going to have much success flaking into a dip, even if you have a ridge like right here. This ridge is actually dipping, or it might even be perfectly straight, right? Some ridges are actually dipping a little bit. You don't want to knap either a straight or dipping ridge. You want a ridge that's convex or bulging, okay? You can knap and you can have success with these ridges that are perfectly flat, but it's not going to go very far in most cases. Okay. So that kind of fanned out a little bit. Took off some of that steppiness. It didn't go very far. I didn't really want it to go that far. Didn't have to. It did take off some of that lump. I think if I abrade the edge enough, I can blow through the rest of that step fracture. If I just put the flaker right here, I have a bulging or convex edge here. I mean a ridge. So I should be able to get rid of the rest of it. You can see how that ridge is bowed outward. It's convex. Okay, that's the one I'm going to follow. Okay. That was the flake right there. Now it's, inward and downward. That one was kind of more inward than downward. But a lot of your pressure flakes are going to be mostly downward. The more inward you push, the longer it's going to be, the longer the flake, if you do it right. Sometimes it'll crush and it won't go anywhere. So you've got to get used to it. That just takes time. It's not your fault if you don't do it right away. If you don't get the hang of it right away, like these long flakes, that's why you got to spend many hours and many pounds of rocks later to get the hang of it. Now this ridge is pretty flat, but I think I can make the flake travel. If I don't want it to be flat, I just nip it a little bit and it'll be more rounded. You see what I mean? I took back the edge a little bit by nipping it downward, and then the ridge becomes more rounded. It starts more rounded here in the beginning. Still kind of flat in the middle, but at least in the beginning it's more convex, so it has more of a chance to successfully start and then hopefully carry on the rest of the way. If it doesn't crush. It's kind of thin. Yeah, that didn't go very far. That's okay. I'll just move over a little bit. Try to follow that ridge again from that spot next to it. didn't have enough power to wipe out that little bitty lump in the middle, but that's okay. Yeah, that happens a lot too. Sometimes you can pick those out. Sometimes you'll just have to run another flake. You know, run a flake next to it, preferably somewhere where it'll fan out. The edges will fan out and catch that step. You want to catch the step with the fan edge. You know, you press right here. Press right there. You know, you'll have to take back the edge because it's really thin. Maybe you can start the flake here and hopefully it'll fan out this way. And you'll catch the step fractures with the edge of that fan. You don't want to directly attack step fractures in most cases because it'll just step again right where that first step is. Now you can grind this way too. I hardly ever grind this way. It's just not necessary. I tend to use both percussion and grinding or abrading at the same time. Just as long as the edge is nice and strong. Now in that case, this edge of that fan from this flake came in and popped out that little fingernail that was on there, but it's still a step fracture. You see what I mean? To get rid of that step, I'll have to come in from here or just not worry about it. So I'm pretty much done with the thinning. I just need to work on the edge, make it sharp. How do you make it sharp? You just produce that hollow ground effect, you know. Each bulb of percussion or bulb of pressure will scoop out the material and you'll have a little hollow ground effect right near the edge. And that produces a very thin edge with all those little bulbs of pressure or bulbs of percussion. You don't want to do too much abrading at this point because you don't want any dull spots. But when you use your Flintknapping tool to scrape the edge, it still remains fairly sharp. I'm using mostly downward pressure here, so I'm not trying to drive flakes inward. I just want that little bulb of percussion or bulb of pressure to thin out that edge. I'm going to come back and do the same on the other side. So I'll be having opposing bulbs of pressure. And hopefully I'll get a nice hollow ground effect right near the edge. That's the goal. Now, it's actually easier to do that effect with antler or a soft pressure tool. Copper is pretty good. Steel's okay, like what I'm using. But antler does a very good job as long as it's a high quality antler and it doesn't crush while you're trying to do it. As long as the antler doesn't crush. So the edge is pretty thin. Feels pretty sharp. You can leave it jaggedy or you can dress it up. You can put little serrations in it. Most artifacts they show a very painstaking finish that either makes it look straight or serrated. But they go back and they pick at it very carefully to make sure it's sharp. Okay, so opposing bulbs of pressure to get that edge really thin. I'll just leave it jaggedy like that. Now this is perfectly usable like this. You can haft it. It's perfectly usable. Just like that. You don't have to go any further with it. You don't have to put nice sharp barbs on it. You don't have to do anything with the base. You can just haft it just like that. That's the easiest solution for an arrowhead on a flake. Okay, one side, original flake scar. Although there is some, there's some intrusion from the edge flaking, but it's pretty much still the original flake scar. Most of the flaking or the flake scars are on the other side. Okay, I'm not going to stop here, but you can stop here and do all of your arrows this way, all of your arrowheads this way, if you're just starting out. You don't need sharp barbs. In fact, some states, if you're hunting with these, they don't want barbs on there. It needs to be an inch wide. That looks like about an inch wide to me, or 7/8. And that's perfectly fine. I just haft it with epoxy or with some hot melt glue, industrial hot melt glue. All you need is a wrap on the shaft. You don't even need to wrap anything on the arrowhead itself. If you want to use natural pine pitch glue, that's fine too. Just be aware that it's more brittle. It'll break off, especially in cold weather. Asphaltum or pine pitch glue will become very brittle in cold weather. So that's why I just use epoxy or hot melt glue, industrial hot melt. All right, so let's see. I'm going to I'm going to do a concave base on here so I can run some more flakes up in there, see if I can get rid of those steps. Now I wasn't trying to be fancy with the flaking or anything, so just going to be random. Just going to be random for the rest of this, since I didn't start out trying to do a flaking pattern. Now I also got a request to do ribbon flaking. I can do it, it just takes me a long time, and I've got to practice a few days before I can actually do a video. But on tonight, I haven't napped at all since the last video I made, so that was a while ago. So I'm going to do something easy. Okay, so I'll just make a continuous platform all the way across. And I've got a good surface now. That I can run flakes and try to thin that down and get rid of some of those steps. I don't know if I'll be able to do a whole big old flake, but we'll try it. I'll try with the indirect percussion. Don't try this at home, boys and girls, because you'll probably break the whole thing. I'm going to try to do a shallow and long flake, which means I can't dig in too much. I can't go too high on this platform, and I'm going to be trying an inward strike. Try to get a long, shallow flake. Didn't work, so I'm going to have to do a more powerful flake. So it fanned out, and I think you can see what I mean by capturing step fractures with the side of the fan. See how the side of this fanning out caught those step fractures, and this one didn't go very far because it dipped down. So path of least resistance was just to stop. And luckily it didn't travel down this ridge, because it could have traveled a little bit down this ridge and may have taken some edge off. But the direction of the strike was inward this way. Inward this way, not this way. So this was a light strike, didn't go very far because it's obviously some steppy junk in there. Now there are ways to pick at that and get that step off. Let's see what I can do here. But it's not necessary. You can still haft it very easily. But just to show how to get rid of it, let's see if I can do it. Try to pick it off with this little fine flicker. Get a good seat on it. Well, I got some of it. So yeah, just picked at it with this and got it off. Okay, let's see, what else could I do with this? Make the base a little bit deeper. Still got about 10 minutes left before camera shuts off. Mostly downward flakes, mostly aggressive pressure because I don't need to send them very far. Created another little island in there. Okay, so yeah, I can go pretty deep with that base if I wanted to. Depends on the style I'm going to be going for. I'm not going to go for any particular style, I don't think. Let me see. I'll just put in some side notches just to show you. A lot of the actual artifacts had very delicate edges on the base too, for some reason, even though it crushes in the haft. But I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to kind of make a robust edge on this one. But yeah, some artifacts have very, very delicate bezel edges. For some reason, I don't know. Okay. All right, so to make it robust, I just kind of trim it back like this. This thickens up the edge right where it's going to be hafted. Okay, and then some notches. It can be used like this, perfectly usable in areas where barbs are allowed. This is perfectly fine. On notching, if you haven't seen my other video, I try to square out the bottom of the notch and then press in the middle. You know, make the bottom of the notch flat. Don't push in the middle of a rounded notch. Do you know what I mean? Try to make it flat so that the next flake is pushed off right in the middle of that flat area. And make it robust so that it'll seat well. That one kind of crushed, but you just widen it again, flatten it out, and then push off in the middle. If you want a narrow entry, you've got to start with a very thin edge and a very thin flaker. And then what I think a lot of guys do is just take a punch and continue it after the initial flaking inward to get that first narrow entry. They'll just switch to a punch, or they'll use a vertical pressure flaker so they don't touch the edges again. And I'm just going to do it carefully. Hopefully I won't be touching the edges too much. And I'll do an expanding notch. I use both passive and aggressive pressure on notches, but it's mostly passive, I think. I don't know, it's hard to tell. Maybe, I don't know, half and half aggressive and half passive. Just whatever I think needs to be done. Sometimes there's a really thick, tough area, and if I try passive on that area, it will just stall out. So I'll have to really aggressively push through it. A lot of Native American artifacts have the last punch out very sharp. You know what I'm saying? The last punch out leaves the bottom of the notch very sharp, so they don't go back and grind the edges in the notches. Now I don't know why they do that, because you know it'll cut the lashings if you wrap them tight. But that's the way I see a lot of them. You don't see a lot of crushing or stalling at the bottom of the notches. So you just leave the last punch out alone after you've taken the last flake. Okay. And another feature that some of these have is needle tips. So I think I have enough time to try to put a needle tip on here. Pretty straightforward, just downward pressure. A lot of passive pressure, so you don't lose control of what you're doing. You don't want to be too aggressive on the tip because you'll snap it right off. But you don't want to be so passive that you're actually dulling the edge. You want to be able to get a snap with every pressure flake. snapping sound. Okay, I think we're out of time. Oh, there you go. Arrowhead on a flake. This is heat treated material, translucent.